Hello everyone, and welcome to the first episode of Hypervillainy TV. I'm your host, Hypervillainy. So, I guess you probably want to know exactly who I am and what you can sort of expect from me. This is the first episode after all. Basically, I'm an artist, I'm a designer, I make a lot of stuff. I love giant robot models, I love action figures, I just sort of love pop culture in general. I mean, anything with monsters and giant robots. And yeah, like total chaos and destruction generally appeal to me. I mean, it's in my name, Hypervillainy. What you should expect is DIY content. On top of that, I also want to talk about what it's like sort of being creative and the different challenges that you face, the different kind of things that you'll ultimately have to confront and deal with. Things that I deal with on a daily basis, things that you probably already deal with. And, sometimes it's just kind of nice to know that someone else experiences the same stuff that you do, that you're not alone in this process. I want to show you how to build models and how to do that, but I also want to, I don't want to approach this as, hey, I'm going to be telling you how to do this. I want to approach it from like, hey, here's a possible avenue you could do. Here's sort of stuff that I've tested out that you don't really have to test out on your own. You can use that to your advantage. And, I would love to, hopefully as this channel grows, I'd love to see work from all of you out there. So anyways, really poorly done segue. The topic of this video is about creating when you don't have a lot of money. And this is something that I'm very familiar with. I love a lot of expensive tools, and I promise I'll probably be showing a lot of the stuff that I use, stuff that isn't really super cheap or sometimes can be super cheap. But I love tools, and I love buying tools, and I love how those tools make me feel when I buy them. But it's not always practical to buy a single-use tool that's only good for one thing. And let's face it, when you're a creative person, you're kind of confronted on the daily with, expensive tools like Photoshop. If you're a designer, then it's all the Adobe programs. ZBrush if you're into 3D modeling. If you're in the modeling community, pretty much anything made by like Tamiya. But there's a lot of stuff. And, I'm also a fan of like fine art paint. Golden is amazing, but it's also kind of pricey. I think it's really good to sort of approach things as like, hey, how can I do this at the lowest budget that I possibly can? If you're, for instance, painting models, like, buy a cheap model kit to practice off of. Say, hey, I'm going to make this the best I can with what I know, with what I have available to me. And, maybe get like some cheap paint brushes and some cheap paints. You'll learn how to do things on a budget, and you'll ultimately be doing it. When you do something and you think you need these expensive tools to do this stuff, it kind of holds you back. It stops you from doing it because you feel like, hey, I need to be ready to do this thing. I have to be completely 100% prepared, and you're going to keep putting those obstacles in the way when you don't feel 100% prepared. You're going to be like, well, sure, I got this expensive tool. I was finally able to get it after 5 years, but now I need this other thing in order to do this project. And, I always, I remember when I was growing up and, whenever I wanted to pursue a project, really just about anything, I'd go to the local craft store, my parents would take me, and they would always kind of, nudge me in the direction of buying kind of the cheapest materials available, which most people will say, hey, if you're going to start something, if you're going to do something, if you're going to pursue airbrushing, get the highest quality airbrush you can, get a good air compressor, and get some good airbrush paints, and you'll be set for life. It won't break down, you won't have to worry about the damage or anything that happens, it's under warranty. If you buy a cheap airbrush, this is what a lot of people say, if you buy a cheap airbrush, you're going to be dealing with basically you're going to be dealing with replacing it every couple of months or so if you're getting a lot of use out of it. Or you may be turned off from the experience entirely because it's a poor quality airbrush. But I think it's really interesting because fairly recently I went to KaijuCon, and there was a vinyl toy artist named Mark Nagata. He produces Sofubi toys through his company, Max Toys Company. And he's he's a guy who's pretty prominent in that Japanese Sofubi, the soft vinyl market. And he grew up with that stuff. He grew up with those old school Japanese toys from the 70s, and they made a major impact on his life. And so he likes to customize them. He likes to develop them. And the question came up, what airbrush do you use, Mark? At his panel. And he straight up said, I prefer using cheap master airbrushes that I find off of Amazon. And if you look at them, they're like $25, I think. And, he just replaces them every once in a while. And he found that, while he does have a really nice Iwata airbrush, he also found that, he doesn't like to use that with really toxic lacquer paints. They can damage airbrushes pretty quickly, at least according to him. So, he felt like it wasn't really worth the investment of using his really nice Iwata that he had used for his previous illustration work and applying that to his vinyl work that uses much more corrosive paints. Or, maybe corrosive's not the right word, but just paints that were, in general, a lot worse. Still going. Okay, good. So on top of that, there's also another couple good reasons to use cheap airbrushes. When you get into airbrushing, it's quite a big investment. You're always, you need to buy an air compressor, you need to buy an airbrush, you need to buy the paints. And if you've never painted before, but you really like the thought of airbrushing and you want to get into it, well, I think the best way is to kind of go with something cheaper. So, side note, I actually have an airbrush that I really like that I feel like is affordable, but I actually think it's a really good quality airbrush. And I think if you're interested in getting into that, I'll definitely have a future video. I'll definitely have a video coming up very soon about that airbrush that, hey, if you want to check it out, I highly suggest it. There's also a lot of really good cheap air compressors on the market. You have a lot of options, but I'll get into that in that future video. But yeah, so if you want to get into airbrushing, if you start off with a cheaper airbrush, you're probably going to learn a lot more from it. You're going to learn like, hey, this doesn't work for me. This isn't really a good quality airbrush. I don't think that this is going to do the job. Or maybe you might learn, hey, I kind of like this cheaper quality airbrush. It works really well for me. Or you might just learn that, hey, I like airbrushing and I want to continue this. I want to get higher quality stuff now. And yeah, that initial investment it's going to be completely undone by the next investment, which is in better quality equipment. You might feel like, well, I spent a little extra when I didn't need to, but that's how most creative people do things. You buy the cheap tools first, learn from them, and then you start upgrading as you're going along and moving along. And especially as you get better, that's actually a better way to handle things because you find out, hey, I like using this tool. I like doing this. When I got into like building Gundam models, a lot of the times there were very specialized tools, very, very amazing things out there that looked really cool and were really expensive. And I'm like, oh, well, I want that. I want to have that tool because I want to make good stuff, but I didn't have the skill yet to pursue that. A lot of the people that used those tools had that skill and found that, hey, I need a specialized tool just for that. And that's really what it comes down to. It's, when you start off cheaply, you start off with a more general sense. You start off with more general tools. And as you use them, you're just going to get better at them. And you're going to find that, hey, maybe I do want this specialized tool. Maybe I do want this thing that's going to make my work a little bit easier over time. And by that point, you might even be able to afford it because you're actually working in that professional sphere. Or maybe not. Maybe you're working in a different professional sphere and it just turns out that you're making a little bit more money. So you can drop that investment and you feel like it's worth it. So my suggestion is that when you're starting out, buy the cheap shit. Nothing works better than cheap shit when you're first starting out and figuring this out. And hopefully I'll be able to show you what some of that stuff is. Like I said, I also want to showcase some of the cool specialized tools, but I think there's a lot of value in the cheap stuff. Um, and ultimately it helps you in the process, and you might fail a few times, you might fall flat on your face, but I think that's going to work out a lot better for you in the long run, because you're just going to learn faster and you're going to learn better, and you're going to want to pursue projects and make those projects the best they can possibly be within your mind, within what you see. And your first couple of projects just aren't going to be like that. I mean, I still have projects that aren't like that, but I've kind of learned over time that it's like, what exists in real life is better than what exists in my mind. And it feels like it's turning out more and more true. I feel like I've sort of been accidentally creating stuff that's a lot better than I could have even conceived of it being. Those were some very weird contractions there. Yeah, I mean, I feel like that what I create now doesn't always match exactly my vision of what I want it to be, but I think it turns out better. I think it turns out better, not just for the sake that it exists, but these little happy accidents that I sort of make along the way make a project a little bit better. And it turns out a little bit different than what I see it as. And so I kind of have that weird disconnect moment where I feel like, wow, I didn't even create this. And I can sort of appreciate it from a different perspective. And it's really kind of nice to have that. So, in summary, buy the cheap. You're going to be a lot better off that way. Starting off at least. I mean, maybe not always, but yeah. I mean, I think start off that way. Oh. So anyways, this is Hypervillainy signing off. Have yourself a wonderful day. And if you like what you have seen so far, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. And I guess ring the bell for subscriptions? I don't know. Kind of new at this. So anyways, see you guys next time.